I am so conservative.
Rationalize in my head. These are things I read in
And
the
I'm going to talk about Willow Creek.
Okay.
Willow Creek, a few years back, had
remembered
invited.
at the time when Will Rogers said, I don't belong to any organized religion. I'm a Baptist.
Yeah.
I am so conservative. If you didn't jump to conclusions, you might not get any exercise. I am so conservative. I am so conservative. And welcome to the Unknown Webcast. Many are stifling their own free speech out of fear of being canceled. Trigger warnings have become more necessary these days for those who have a fear of hearing something or reading something they otherwise would not come in contact with, which is an idea that may expose them to potentially uncomfortable and challenging thoughts. This is that trigger warning. I really am so conservative, I can't turn left even when I'm driving. This includes being theologically conservative. I want to know and believe what is true, and I'm willing to challenge my beliefs. So, if you're easily offended, this is not a safe space for you. Today is April 13, 2021, and this is broadcast number 234. Today, Dr. David Geisler, Dr. Don Deal joins us to talk about a new documentary, Norm Geisler, Not Qualified, and an upcoming book, Practical Apologetics and Integrative Approach. My name is Don Vino, and I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast, and I'm senior researcher Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here is Ronnie, baby.
Hey, Don, did you ever notice that theologically conservative and theologically correct have the same initials?
I did not. That is interesting.
Coincidence? Yeah. I don't think so.
I
don't think so. Okay, so greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm trees came out, saw their shadows, and now we have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsor for this week's webcast is the Bible Buffet. It's not your father's worship experience, but it should be yours. The Bible Buffet. And of course, our regular weekly legal disclaimer, our guests on, I should put an S in parentheses next to the word guest, because never occurred to me that we might have to.
What if
the guests on today's webcast, insert names here, David Geisler and Don Deal, have no connection whatsoever to any of the satirical content of the Unknown Webcast, hereafter known as the webcast, although we probably will not mention it again. The satirical content includes any and all commercials, end credits, puns, smart remarks, or anything else that might fall under the definition of satire. In the meantime, Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. bears no liability for or responsibility for anyone's opinions regarding this satirical content. That's straight from our law firm at the office of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Notice the opinions expressed on this webcast are ours and should be yours too. To ensure your continued access to this program, please go to midwestoutreach.org, click on the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. And don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite video channels. Good day, gentlemen.
Good Don day.
David Geisler. Hello there.
And we have Dr. David Geisler, president of Norman Geisler International Ministries, and his friendly sidekick, Dr. Don Deal, and he is a big deal these days, I guess.
Now, that's enough with those remarks, okay?
At least I like to think so.
I'm trying to lose some pounds here, so don't pick on people like me.
Great to be with you guys.
Great to be with you.
Well, it is good to have you, and as we tell all of our guests, it is once we're done, you'll know you have been had.
Right. Definitely you have been.
Yep. So, Dr. David Geisler, let's start with you.
Right.
y'all are have put together or are working on getting out now a new documentary on your father. But before we do that, I want to ask you kind of we want to keep it short because we have a lot to cover in a short amount of time. Sure. How your view of your father prior to you venturing into apologetics yourself, and has your view changed subsequent to that, and if so, why?
Yeah, wow. I could spend an hour talking about this.
I was afraid of that, but you have like 2 minutes. So.
Yeah, so let me just kind of give you an overview. When I was a little boy, I felt sorry for whoever had to debate my dad, and that was kind of my perspective of apologetics. It's like, yep, he's right, but I don't want to face him, in a debate. And I would basically pray for his enemies, pray for the people he debated, and just pray that God would have mercy on them. So I approached apologetics in a different way. I was never one who, basically wanted to argue with people about the truth of the Christian faith. But then something happened after my dad went home to be with the Lord a year and a half ago. In the last year, I developed a friendship with one of the top atheistic scholars in the country. Don't ask me that story. It's just, that was, divine providence. And I realized when I watched his debating other Christians that when the Christians didn't use those approaches that my father said we needed to use, the classical approach, not just the evidential approach, when they didn't use the classical approach and use both forms of the cosmological arguments, they didn't fare as well. And I just realized when I started making this movie and started talking to all these Christian leaders that my father had a much greater impact on these Christian leaders today than I thought he did. And so my perspective about his importance and what we can still learn from him, that has changed. It's my appreciation of what he's done, and especially his humility. This is something that I really appreciate about him, is he never really focused on himself. He always cared for other people and tried to promote other people first. And that's something certainly I want to emulate in my own life as well.
I think I remember you mentioning that the last time, or at least maybe not on the program, I don't know, but that you used to feel sorry for people who had to go up against your dad.
Yes.
So, but
exactly.
It's interesting to hear this new development. That's
they didn't call him Stormin' Norman for nothing.
For nothing, yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to let you, David, we're going to let you introduce Don Deal, because you have an interesting little story to tell about why he's important in your life.
Yeah, well, Don Deal is the director of our classical apologetic training program. He's also a professor at Veritas University. He teaches class in scientific apologetics. He's working on his PhD in Islamic studies, but don't tell anyone that. And Don, like myself, was a student of my father, and we've all been impacted by him. Don, why don't you?
And when you had a question, who did you go to?
Well, yeah, whenever I had a question, I would never go to my father. I'd basically go to Don Deal and ask, because I'd get a better answer from Don than usually I would from my father.
And with that, there we go, Don.
No pressure, Don, but
no pressure. Now you are turning red.
Now, all right.
Tell us about yourself. What is your faith journey, and how did you get involved in defense of the faith and Norm Geisler?
I come about that in a very natural way. I was raised in a household that my mother took us to church a few times when I was young so we could get a flavor for religion. And then when we said we didn't feel like waking up, that was the end of that experiment. I grew up with a library full of books, Carl Sagan, Isaac Asimov, all these great writers that I found out later were all atheists. And I can remember receiving a book, The Sorcerer's Handbook, as a 13-year-old. Yeah. So I was raised in a Christian environment, socially Christian, but there was no belief there. There was no church attendance, anything of that sort. When I was 16, I gave my life to Christ after being asked questions that really challenged my thinking. Went to college, took my first philosophy class. The philosophy professor for us beginning philosophy students, he was an evangelical atheist. He thought it was his job not just to teach you philosophy, but to disavow you of that prehistoric notion that there's a creator. So he literally said in class, the Apostle Paul invented Christianity. Who wants to debate me? To a class full of freshmen. Let's just say no one raised their hand. So I began to believe that Christianity, that belief in God and Christianity was for the simple people, that I couldn't defend it. It was just something there. Either you believed it or didn't. It was for simple people. And I began to fall away from the church, and I joined the U.S. Navy. I was a naval aviator, a Navy pilot for 10 years, living the high life. I literally lived on Sunset Beach in Hawaii, driving a Porsche and a house with a swimming pool and a jacuzzi. And we had parties every weekend, but there was an emptiness there that was never filled. God called me back a few years later directly to the church. I began to attend church. Almost immediately thereafter, I get a knock on the door. I'm Elder Smith of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I want to tell you about the restored gospel. And I thought, well, he sent somebody to bring me back to church. Maybe he sent me to bring me to this church. So I began to research them, and I said, well, that's not right. Then not too long after, I get a knock on the door. We want to tell you, people saying, we want to tell you about Jehovah's Kingdom of 1,000 years. And I thought, maybe God sent them. So I began to research what they believed. And I said, that's not right. And it got me into this idea that there was all these different belief systems and they couldn't all be right. And that led me to start to read Norm Geisler books, which when the degree in apologetics became available at Southern Evangelical at the time, I was a pilot for a major cargo airline and I couldn't attend classes. So that I needed a distance learning apologetics. Southern Evangelical had begun and had distance learning and apologetics, exactly what I had been called into doing. I mean, the Lord literally let me know this is what I was to do. And through that, I met the guy who was the president at the time, Norman Geisler. And what really impressed me with him, when you meet him in person, he doesn't try to overawe you with his intellect. What really impressed me was his humility. I remember the second time I'd ever seen him, I'd been briefly introduced to him. And when I was at a restaurant, I walk in, he's sitting at a table. And as I sat down, he said, so what have you been up to? And I'm thinking he's going to sit there, on his throne on high and wait for me to approach him and then maybe acknowledge my existence. And instead, he reached out to me to find out what had been going on in my life. And I realized that he didn't just talk the talk, he walked the walk, that he was living the life that I was trying to achieve, to learn all I could learn for the glory of God, and at the same time, not think that I'm God myself. That is, that to be humble and at the same time to do your best to do what God's called you to do. So that was Norm Geisler. And then you flash forward a few years later, and here I am in Naples, Italy in 2012 on a mission trip with the Southern Evangelical students. And they brought in this guy who had written a book I had read that I was very impressed with called Conversational Evangelism. There in Naples, Italy, I met a guy named Dr. David Geisler.
Oh, he sounds familiar.
What a great place to meet, huh?
You really went out of your way to meet each other, didn't you?
We bonded over the best pizza on earth.
I bet you did.
So after that, we decided that we should start doing things together, and we've been working together ever since. He was, yeah.
That what you said about his humility, I've studied at 3 different Christian colleges and a couple of secular ones, and I find that the true scholars, for instance, a guy I knew named John Harper, he taught at my Bible college. He taught the advanced Greek and Hebrew classes.
Wow!
And one day I found myself on a train with him, and I was like, 19? So I'm thinking, okay, what deep theological questions can I pose to his brilliant mind? And all he wanted to talk about was the difference between LED and LCD watches and how you could see one better than the other, you know. And he was really wrapped up in that, you know. And I'm thinking, is he doing this just for me? And it's like, no, that's what he was really thinking about at the moment, you know. And he really was humble. He was very kind, and he was. A lot of times, those are the ones. That's the way you can tell. It kind of almost confirms their scholarship, because there is a saying: the more you know that you don't know. You know,
Yeah.
And so. You know, there's this awareness. Wow, look at how big the world of knowledge is, and I've got this chunk of it that looks impressive to other people, but overall, you know, it makes me humble. So,
Yeah, Don V.
Well, yeah,
You have a story too. You want to share that?
I do, but I'm going to tell you a different kind of a story, a little
Okay.
bit that bears on this. I grew up as an atheist. I became a Christian after my son was born, and I've told this story a little bit before. And read Norm Geisler's books, and I was impressed with them. They helped me to think through logically about the faith and use some of the stuff in my own particular style. And then one day I was contacted because our ministry was primarily to Jehovah's Witnesses. And the physicality of the resurrection is what persuaded me to become a Christian, and has always been one of my favorite doctrines since then. And Norm was involved in a controversy with Murray J. Harris at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School at the time over the physicality of the resurrection. So we had a mutual friend that contacted me and asked if I would go to something called Cornerstone Festival, which was a gathering of around 25,000 sort of Jesus people type characters from around the world. We would describe it as sort of a Christian Woodstock and a flea market. You had sort of everything available there. A lot of contemporary concerts and things going on. But uniquely, they had world-class apologists teaching at the event. Intense. It was pretty interesting. So I was called and asked if I would go to the event and help Norman Geisler out on the issue of the resurrection. And my response was, I would love to meet Norm. I love his books. However, camping with 25,000 of my closest friends is just not my idea of a good time. And so they called me back a few days later and said, you know, we really need you to be there. You understand the issues. You can defend the physicality of the resurrection. We really need someone to help on the table when Norm was not there. And I said, again, I would love to meet him. I would be honored to do that. But camping with 25,000 of my closest friends is just not something I'm looking forward to. So they called back and said, good news. Dr. Geisler said he would share his hotel room with you. And I said, I'm there. So I got there the first day. I spent the entire day behind a table, handling his books, talking to pastors, easily half of which would start off with this question: how do we know the resurrection is physical? To which I would respond, have you ever read the Bible? Didn't really make a lot of points. About 6 o'clock that night, this kind of short guy in a T-shirt comes around the corner, an ice cone in each hand, says, have an ice cream. I'm Norm Geisler. And that's how we met. I immediately knew we were going to be friends when we were driving to town to get dinner. And in totally deadpan from the passenger seat, as we're passing a cemetery, I hear him say, that's the dead center of town.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
He did that a lot because the dinner table too.
Yeah, because I love puns and because he was a punster, we were always trying to outdo each other. So that's how Norm and I
punished each other.
Yes, we punished each other. But he was a true servant. Another story I just had told was we were at a conference together of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, and everyone was up in the main auditorium, and the speaker was up there, and Dr. Geisler was downstairs in the cafeteria. Everyone had already left the place. And I stumbled down there to find him clearing all the tables off where people had left dishes just because. So you have this world-class scholar just cleaning off the tables. You know, he was a genuine servant. I really loved him for that. He wasn't caught up in his own fame at all that I could tell. So that's one of my Norm Geisler stories.
That's a great story.
Now, I want to start off with something very quickly because we're talking about two things, if we have time to at least touch on them.
Yeah.
One of which is a documentary that you have coming out. You're going to be showing in churches, and we want to know why you're doing that. But we thought we would expose them to the trailer, to a trailer that you have out.
Right. Well, this is actually just a part of the movie where we talk about discipleship.
All right, this is the first trailer that you have on there.
Okay.
Which I had downloaded, and so I'm going to use this one, and
That's
then
Norm Geisler, themovie.com.
Yep.
When you go into battle, you want the soldiers you know you can trust. And Dr. Geisler is like going in with an A1 Abrams tank or an F-35.
His debate style was to first win the debate and then bring up the Bible.
He would know, for instance, the page number.
On page 46 of Process Theology, Professor Cobb...
Everybody just sat there and looked at one another as if to say, well, this discussion is over.
Okay, Norm, what I'm not going to do is convert here on television live.
You see a parallel, I think, between the battles that Aquinas was fighting and the battles that we're fighting today that Norm Geisler has contributed so significantly to.
Based upon what he saw going on in the world, he would write apologetics books to deal with those specific issues.
And he was a master at logic.
He already understood the kind of critical questions that were being asked in the secular culture.
Now, if it came to be, and every event that comes to be needs a cause, then the universe needs a cause too.
It opened doors, for pastors, for leaders. It was just incredible as God used his life in that area.
I have that hope, and I think that everyone who does will be able to look back on a life such as we've all gone through of suffering and say, it was worth it.
He paid the price. He paved the way.
He just left an arsenal for the church to draw upon.
In Scripture, God's thoughts, apologetics, defending those thoughts, and then training a generation of people to do just that.
The truth is, none of us are qualified for the things that God has for us to do, but he qualifies us when he calls us.
So I was the most unlikely person in the world ever to be a scholar. God must have a sense of humor, because to pick somebody who couldn't read and say, I'm going to make you a scholar and you're going to write 100 books. I never thought I'd write one book. I never thought I'd read a book to begin with, but God can do anything.
My father inspired a global army of disciples who are continuing the battle for the truth. This is only the beginning.
What I'd like to know is, where do you get ribbons for that kind of typewriter anymore?
Yeah, we had to buy an old typewriter to do that. I have that. Someday I'm going to have a Norm Geisler library where I'm going to have, things from the movie, some of the books that my dad read that influenced him, books on Aquinas, and things like that. Yeah.
So why the documentary, and what do you hope to accomplish out of that, and how are you showing it? Is it like at theaters, you pay $6 for it, or how does this work?
Well, let me start with the last question. We are asking churches to partner with us to show the movie in their church, and then we're developing resources, some of which my father's already developed, and encouraging them to use those resources to better equip people in their churches. And if they are interested in learning more about showing the film in their church, especially during COVID, a lot of times we can't get a lot of people in churches these days because of COVID restrictions, they could just email us at info@ngim, that's Norm Geisler International Ministry. So it's info@ngim.org. And I'll, send some information so you can better understand what it is that we're doing. Now, when I first developed this idea of making a movie about my dad, in the back of my mind, it was just merely something just to show appreciation to my father for all the things that he had been doing all these years, all these people he impacted. And then I started interviewing some of the top Christian leaders and thinkers in the country for the movie. And I discovered that my father had a greater impact on a lot of people than I thought. And what I realized is part of the problem in the Christian community, I think, is we didn't really listen to what Norm Geisler said that we need to do in the areas of apologetics, theology, and philosophy. And if we do, and if we make that effort in the church to get back to some of the things that he taught, I think the church would be in better shape. Josh McDowell makes this point about the inerrancy of Scripture, that Norm was that spike in the ground that kept the elephant's foot from moving any further. And that's kind of now how I see my father, is that he played a more significant role within evangelical Christianity than I even realized.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. And in fact, our blog this week, we're kind of dealing with the question of progressives who are progressing out of the faith.
Right.
And why is that? And I really believe, I firmly believe, it is because the church largely has lost the concept of teaching exegetically, verse by verse, book by book, through the Bible, where all of the apologetics arguments do come up at some point.
Right.
In the process of doing that for this, what's called seeker-sensitive, and we have a Calvinist on here who would say seekers aren't sensitive to the faith anyway. Seeker-sensitive.
He was elected to do that.
Yeah, right.
To believe this.
Right, as though the purpose, the church had no purpose prior to the purpose-driven church. I don't really understand that. But the problem is then that it becomes, how do we entertain unbelievers into the church and broaden the market base, rather than equipping Christians to go out into culture with an informed faith that can meet the challenges of unbelievers? Isn't that really what Norm was teaching? This is what we need to do?
Yes, and that's why he and I actually co-wrote this book, Conversational Evangelism, is because, I had learned all this stuff from him even as a little boy. But my concern is, okay, how do we use all these good resources in a way to help people take a step to the cross, and not expect them just to come to church? Because in a lot of ways, especially today, that's the last place that a skeptic or atheist will, that's the last place he will go or she will go. And so we need to kind of meet them where they're at and find out what their interest is and what their questions are, and then answer those questions in a way to help them take those steps to the cross. And that's what I'm trying to do with this skeptical atheistic scholar friend that I've made in the last year. I'm not trying to win the argument with him. I'm just trying to say that I think there are answers to some of the really great questions that he's raising in his books.
Yeah, and I think it's important to have relationships with unbelievers that are not always about evangelism. That just becomes part of who you are.
Right.
I have, in fact, I have friends who are Jewish, and they're not Christians. However, when I was in construction, I would have one of them would call me and say, "Are you still a Bible banger?" And I would go, "Of course I am."
Yeah.
He'd say, "Okay, good. I have a client potentially for you," and I told him he could trust you.
Right.
So he wanted to know, do I still believe what I always claimed to believe? He was open to that. He was open to debating it. In fact, sometimes he would think long and hard about a question that would trip me up the next time we were together. But he still saw something in my demeanor and my living out the faith that said, okay, we can trust this guy. Now, Christians, unfortunately, sort of have this concept of, well, I can sort of pick and choose what I want to believe and still call myself Christian. And we have a sponsor that sort of deals with that.
Yeah, we sure do. And they have, some questions. Are you tired of hearing all about the difference between the milk of the word and the meat of the word? Are you tired of, are you wondering when your church is going to get around to serving the ice cream and cheesecake of the word? Does your pastor take the whole Bible thing way too seriously? Well, then you need to check out the Bible Buffet. It's not your father's worship experience. Everything at the Bible Buffet is prepared with your comfort and enjoyment in view. Everything there is gluten-free, trans-fat-free, and truth claim-free. And all of their dishes are piping hot and ready to eat. And even in this day of pandemics and COVID and whatnot, it's always open. You can use Bible Buffet's carry-out service. Its regular Sunday specials include Arian appetizers, Sibelian succotash, Galatian goulash, Gnostic nut salad, and Pelagian pie. And don't forget, the Bible Buffet is a fully accredited ministry of the Church of Smorgasbordianism. The Bible Buffet, it's not your father's worship experience, but it should be yours. I think I remember,
I'm sorry.
I think I remember your dad laughing at the Church of Smorgasbordian, or the.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So.
Can we ask Don Deal his thoughts on what you just asked me? I would be very interested in hearing.
Absolutely.
Could you rephrase the question again, please? Because I was listening to David and I don't remember the original question.
Neither do I.
I don't either.
It was more or less on why do you think this movie is important? What is it?
Oh, why do you think?
Yeah.
What sparked the idea of doing a documentary like this, and how is it that it can be beneficial to churches to consider showing it?
I can't speak to what sparked it, but I can tell you the value is the drifting that goes on. Everybody's tempted to drift in a direction that's easy. It's hard pushing up a hill all the time, and settling down in a little niche or rolling back down the hill is the easy way to do things. In churches, many pastors get tired of doing the heavy lifting and the hard work and move back to the comfortable. And so they start to take it easy on doctrine, and they start to not stand for the truth because defending it is hard, and they start to move more into a touchy-feely church where just Jesus loves you and that's all you need to know. And they've lost the intellectual side. Jesus said the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. And somehow the church has fallen into believing that Jesus said the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul. And they've completely forgotten the mind. And Norm was there to remind us that our mind needs to be cultivated. We're made in the image of God, and letting our mind turn to jello is an insult to our Creator.
Well, Don makes the observation sometimes that many people in the church, I think this is your observation, I think I'm accurately representing it, that many people in the church act like church history began 18 minutes ago. Is that kind of? Yeah. So there are a lot of churches of 18 minutes ago around. And as what I've tried to do I teach a lot of adult Sunday school, and I have on more than one occasion taught different church history from different perspectives, like life of Martin Luther, life of John Calvin, history of the Reformation. And I've tried to show a few things. Number one, literally every issue we're confronting today in one form or another has been an issue that the church has dealt with. Not exactly the same, but very remarkable similarities in many cases. And I think some people, not everybody, but some people already have this kind of built-in hunger for some kind of sense of connectedness to all the way back. Seems kind of strange. Wait a minute, the New Testament ended and then nothing important happened until we came along, And so when I look at this video, I'm thinking, if I were teaching another church history class next week, this might be, if I was, for instance, covering the history of the church in the 20th century, how could I not, take time out to show your video? It's something. Dr. Geisler was at the center of one of the biggest watershed moments in evangelical history, the International Council on Biblical Inerrancy. It's funny that we should be talking about this today because Stephen J. Nichols just came out with a biography of R.C. Sproul.
Right.
And of course, between the two of them, I mean,
Right.
those guys did most of the heavy lifting.
Yep.
I mean, I didn't know this, but R.C. Sproul was dealing with inerrancy for a good 5 or more years through his Ligonier study center when it was in Pennsylvania. 5 or more years before, and in fact, they'll say that's it. Kind of the International Council of Biblical Inerrancy kind of grew out of that. Well, then I think of Dr. Geisler and all the books he wrote, the commentary on the statement. So these two men, when you think of late 20th century church history, they account for a whole bunch of it.
If I could add something else to what I said earlier, in Christian apologetics specifically, not just in churches in general, but in Christian apologetics and specifically, in the last 50 years, what we've seen is the most popular argument for the existence of God is the Kalam cosmological argument popularized by William Lane Craig.
Right.
And what that says is that you cannot have an infinite series of events through time, that there has to be a starting point somewhere, and that starting point is God for creating everything. Well, the limitation of that is you end up with a clockwork universe that God can wind up, or in the words of Stephen Hawking, God lit the blue torch paper. That is, God started it. There's no reason to suppose that God is one, or that God is many, or that God still exists. He wound it up, and it's just going along by that argument alone.
And wasn't William Paley a deist?
That one I'm not sure, but I'd have to look that one
I mean, he had a great argument. I mean, it's a wonderful argument.
But the problem is it's limited in that it establishes a beginner, but it does not establish a sustaining, continually existing cause. For that, you don't need the horizontal version of the argument. You need the vertical cosmological argument, which is from Thomas Aquinas, and that's what Norm Geisler brought back. So you don't have just a beginning cause, but a sustaining cause. And a quick version of this goes like, I know that I exist. I did not cause myself to exist. I don't have to exist. I'm not a necessary being. My parents had to exist before I could exist in a ontological, not in a temporal sense. They had to exist. If the earth didn't exist, I couldn't exist. If the universe didn't exist, I didn't have to exist. Well, there's no reason that the earth has to exist. There's no reason the universe has to exist. Moment to moment, there's either an infinite number of causes sustaining everything, or there's an ultimate ground to everything that keeps us in existence. Yeah. And in the Bible, it tells us that Jesus Christ upholds creation by his power. This tells us about a God who continues to exist, that by upholding everything, every atom, every subatomic particle, everything in existence, he knows where everything is and what's going to happen. So you have a God who knows the past, the present, and the future, and you have a God that continues to exist and a God that keeps us in existence. So you switch from a conception of a universe like a clock, which dates back to the time of Isaac Newton, where you wind up the clock. And then when they asked Simon Laplace about that, the Frenchman, he said, when they asked him, "Where's God in your hypothesis?" He said,
"No need." Now, the story I heard is Napoleon asked him that question.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's a story I've heard. Well, in the vertical version, with God as a sustaining cause, you have to have God continuing. So you switch from the conception of the universe as a clock that could be wound up and run on its own to the universe being more like a song that's being sung or a movie being shown. If God stops singing, the universe goes out of existence. It cannot continue on without his sustaining power.
Now, in this postmodern world, how is it going with those? I mean, in terms of dealing with people who really, apparently don't have a lot of concern over logical consistency.
Oh, absolutely. They have their truth. They're happy that if they feel like they have a logically consistent world that could over time change and develop and grow, is the way they would put it, then they're happy within their own life. And so I like to point out to them, What happens to other people that have their truth and it comes into clash with your truth? What happens when Al-Qaeda decides to crash an airplane into your truth? Don't we have to have something outside of us that we can reference to say, this is real, this is true? Don't you feel like there's something that can't be just personal, but has to be universal, that has to reside not within us, but reside outside of us?
Objective instead of subjective.
Yes.
My father would say that some things are sayable, but not necessarily meaningful. Like I can say, I cannot utter a word in English. That's sayable, but not very meaningful. And I can say there are no absolutes, but again, that's not very meaningful because I'm making an absolute just by saying there are no absolutes.
Absolutely. So do you find yourself having to look for a different starting point in the discussion?
Well, I just want to point out one thing that on what Dave was saying. Not only is it not meaningful, it renders itself untrue. If you say I can't speak a word in English, you just want a word in English.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. No, sorry, Ron, go ahead.
Well, I'm thinking about what kind of people is apologetics a concern? What does it tend to be a concern? Who tends to gravitate to it the most? Can you break it down demographically? And I think to some extent you can. Of course, in God's providence, anybody at any given time can grab and say, you're going to be an apologist or for me. So I'd say the first thing everybody would need, though, is they have to be concerned for evangelism. That's the prerequisite. The
hope,
grand,
absolutely,
the hope we have in Christ.
Yeah, and so you have a lot of people in the pews who are very glad to hear about the gospel. They want their children brought up in it, or if they don't have children, they're still they know they need it for themselves. Mm-hmm. But at this point in their lives, in terms of both really evangelism and apologetics, it's not it's like they can't see it as for them.
Yes.
I find the two groups that tend to violate that are young people, before they're married, and older people whose grandchildren are coming back to them from colleges and universities, and sometimes parents themselves, but grandparents I'm hearing from saying, "Man, my grandson came back. He was such a nice young Christian boy, and now he's just spouting all this unbelief."
With that, I want to transition into something because. It is my view, and Ron, you know this, we've talked about this before, and David and I talked about this briefly yesterday, that apologetics is a tool that should be used in the church on a continuous basis.
Right.
It is used to disciple people into the faith as unbelievers and to disciple them in the faith as believers, and it really is for everybody. And they have a new book they're working on called Practical Apologetics, an Integrative Approach. What are you trying to accomplish in this book, and why do you think it's necessary relative to what we just talked about?
So let me just simplify the apologetic task. I think apologetics is a four-letter word to a lot of Christians. And so I think what we need to do is change the analogy of 1 Peter 3:15 to Matthew 13, verses 19 to 23, and talk about cultivating good soil in the lives of our non-believing friends. And the way we do this is by helping them understand the distortions in their perspective, distortions about themselves, distortions about God the Father, and distortions about Jesus Christ. If we can get people to understand that apologetics really does apply to the everyday person, then we can help the church to get better equipped to deal with the questions and barriers that we face in witnessing to people today. And we wrote this book, Don and Brian and I were all influenced by my dad. And what we want to do is take all the apologetics that we were taught by my father and other people and integrate that into our witness so that we can be more effective in not just, winning the argument, but winning the person, helping that person to take a step closer to Christ. And so, the book is broken up into different sections. We want to talk about the problems in witnessing today and the pathways in witnessing today, understanding what it is to live in a post-Christian world. Why is it that makes our tasks more difficult? And then, Don's going to talk about the scientific apologetics part and the philosophical basis for these cosmological arguments, helping people to understand that they need to use both forms of the cosmological argument, so that when we witness to skeptics who say, well, David Hume answered the criticism of the cosmological argument, we can say, well, Norm Geisler actually responded to David Hume's criticism.
It took him a few hundred years, but
yes, yeah, and
So
we want to just help people understand that a little better. Yeah.
Let me just take it back a step or two, because as you know, although I hang around with academics and we carry on interesting conversations, I really am a street fighter. That's what I am.
Yeah.
I've always been a street fighter, and I love hanging around with just average people.
Right.
Very often, I have to say, when you're trying to talk to somebody, you have to ask them, number one, what they believe, and number two, figure out what they're invested in. Because it may not be something to do with David Hume, and they may not even know who David Hume is.
Exactly.
So how do you tell, say, a grandmother whose grandchildren went to church and have now moved to progressivism because they don't like the doctrine of, I don't know,
aseity.
Of what?
A divine aseity.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, they wouldn't even know what that is.
So in our book, we have both. We have both heavier content and then what I call light apologetics. So let me give you an example of a light apologetic question that I would use with a skeptic. I would say, have you ever heard of a philosopher named Anthony Flew? Do you know that Anthony Flew was one of the greatest atheistic philosophers of the 20th century, but before he died, he gave up his atheism. Do you know why? Actually, you can Google Lee Strobel, Anthony Flew, the interview, and hear from Anthony Flew's own words why he gave up his atheism. And so I start with something light, like, why do you think a great philosopher, a great thinker in the 20th century gave up his atheism? Actually, he says, because of the evidence for intelligent design, that the universe didn't just happen by random forces, that it was intelligently designed. And he's convinced from the evidence now that the universe had a beginning. And if the universe had a beginning, guess what? There must be a beginner, right? If you have a big bang, you have to have a what? A big banger. And so, and then I'll build on that, Don. I'll say, if something exists, you and I exist, would you agree that something can't come from nothing? Then if we exist and something can't come from nothing, then something must have always existed. Why? Because if there ever was a time in the beginning when there was nothing, there'd still be nothing. The fact that we exist means that there is something out there that created all of us. And then from the cosmological, from the argument from effect to cause, you talk about the fact that we are a moral effect. There must be a moral cause. We're in the intelligent effect. Therefore, there has to be an intelligent cause. So the cause must be all-powerful, infinitely moral, infinitely intelligent. What does that sound like? Does that sound like the God of theism? And then we build our case for Christianity once we help people to understand that there's good evidence to believe in a creator.
Right. Even and one of the Geislerisms I like is even Maria in Sound of Music knew that nothing comes from nothing, nothing ever will.
That's a great one. And by the way, when people go to the movie, we're going to have like a brochure we're going to give people when they go out, and we'll have all these Geislerisms, like you know, the best way to answer a false claim. Do you know the phrase? Apply the claim to itself.
Right.
Or just because something is sayable doesn't mean it is meaningful.
Right.
These little
Right.
phrases that my father
he would say, and I love it, and this is one of the things I learned from him early on, which I appreciate, is take the argument, extend it out as far as it can possibly go, turn it on its head, and see if it survives.
Yes. Exactly.
So the book, now, as you're working on that, Practical Apologetics, an integrative approach, do you have an idea when it will be available?
Yes, but my Lord willing, by the end of the year. And I should tell you that this book is really conversational evangelism on steroids. Because if people are just starting to learn apologetics, start with conversational evangelism. Learn something slowly. And then from that, then my father has some other really good books. He wrote with Patty. Do you remember the name of that book? Reasons for Belief, Don? Do you read?
I'm checking the title and I'll get it right to you.
Yeah. And then, so this book that Don and I and Brian Henson are writing, this is for people who already have had some training in apologetics, and we're writing it mainly for Bible colleges and for seminaries to use, and also very knowledgeable lay people in churches that want to grow, not just in their apologetic knowledge, because there's great books on that, but how to actually use it in witnessing to people, especially in a postmodern world. Yeah.
Reasons for Belief is the book you were talking about.
And that's a great book for people who don't have much background in the area of apologetics. But again, Don V, we want to encourage people to change the paradigm from 1 Peter 3:15, given an answer, because people don't ask us questions anymore. So what? I don't have any apologetic responsibilities? No, that word means to remove barriers, whether we're asked a specific question or not. And that's why we want to encourage people to learn how to cultivate good soil. Matthew 13, verses 19 to 23. Misconceptions people have about themselves, about God the Father and Jesus. And once you can begin to do that, now you're using apologetics. You just don't know it. Yeah.
So I want to share just a brief story on why this is so important. Years ago, I was at a quote seeker-sensitive kind of a church, seeker-driven, whatever. And the pastor was frustrated because he was feeling like, I cannot get our people to go out and share the gospel. Why is that the case? So he brought in a couple of different foreign mission experts and a couple of other pastors, and then myself. And his secretary was there. So we're all gathered around the table, and they're all sharing about, well, you have type 1 evangelism, type 2 evangelism, type 3 evangelism, and they're going through all of this very complicated scenarios. And the pastor looked at him and said, what do you think the problem is? I said, I know what the problem is. They're afraid someone's going to ask them a question they can't answer.
Right.
And he goes, well, that's too easy. That's too simple. I'm teaching. And so I said, I looked at the secretary and I said, do you evangelize? She goes, no. I said, why? She says, I'm afraid someone's going to ask me a question I can't answer.
Yes. So in our book, Conversational Evangelism, one of the things we encourage people to do is when people ask us questions we don't have the answer for right away, just say, that's a great question. Can I think about it and do some research and get back with you? Would that be okay? So that way we show that, we're interested in the truth, not just kind of winning some kind of silly argument, right?
Okay, this is an important question. I really like this question. Richard Neal. Question for guest. Would you say apologetics is more effective on a personal level than, say, a debate with Aaron Ra? Formal debates would have a lot of viewers.
So who's Aaron Ra?
He's an atheist.
Okay.
That's not his born name, but that's his.
It's his atheist name.
Yeah,
he's baptized into atheism.
Yeah,
he's rah for atheism. Yeah,
that's his nom de guerre. His name for war.
All right, I'm going to go first, and then you all can weigh in. My view is this: debates are not necessarily helpful because they already convinced that their candidate won the debate. Right. I'm not saying they're completely unhelpful. I think they can be in a public forum.
Right.
Expose you to information that you might look at in the comfort of your home on YouTube.
Well, as you point out,
my experience is it's more on an individual basis. People have real questions. If you can figure out what it is, you can help them sort out the answer.
Well, you pointed out to me that a lot of times you conduct a debate where you have an audience, whatever forum it's in, because of the audience to help them.
True. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, the biggest debate I engaged in, I knew the two fellows that we were debating. It was 2 versus 2 debate. I knew there was nothing I could possibly say on earth. Number one, I'm not the Holy Spirit. I don't convict them. But I knew that there was nothing I could say to those guys because they were so invested in their position that would cause them to have to give up everything that makes them who they are. But I also knew that on television and on the YouTube that there would be thousands, and at one point there was 100,000 views. And among those people, there would be some people who are curious and maybe open-minded. So I don't see it as an either-or question. You do it as God brings people into your life. You talk to them and you build relationships. And apologetics is just a natural part of discussions with anybody with a different worldview. But the formal debates are also helpful. It all depends. But, the best, I don't mean to keep going, but the best advice I've ever heard on formal debates was from a guy named L Geisler. He said, you always do the debates on their territory. So you don't debate an atheist at a church because then he's going to influence people from the church who will be mostly attendees. You debate the atheist at a university or other secular setting where the audience will be his people. You don't debate a Muslim in a church. You debate a Muslim in a public area where his people will be there. Right. That's how you make debates more effective.
Now, I like that, and we practiced that. In fact, early on, we were some of the original AOL users. We still have our screen name because it has no numbers on it. We were so early.
What's that?
Mine was Cults Are Us. Cults
no,
Are
Us. I mean, what's AOL?
What's AOL? Yeah. You have mail.
There was something called CompuServe once upon a time.
Yeah, I remember that one too.
But we would go into the Jehovah's Witnesses room and debate Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, there are only a few that would interact with us. But we wrote because we knew there are a lot of what we would call the lurkers.
Yes.
Right.
They wouldn't interact, but because they're in the comfort of their own home, seeing this occurring on the screen, they're under no obligation to answer anything we're saying, so they can actually consider what is being said on both sides and weigh it out.
Yeah,
I think in that forum, debates can be enormously helpful.
So I've changed my views about this. I used to, cringe when my father would debate people, but Greg Kokel, who wrote a book called Tactics, he and I did a question and answer time at SES's Apologetics conference a couple years ago. And between our two books, it answered a lot of the questions that people asked from the audience. And I realized there is a person that tends to be more hostile to the faith. And my approach is more indirect. It's more sensitive. It's more helping person see the truth for themselves. But his approach is kind of like dealing with people that are in your face. And I think sometimes you need that 2x4 approach to witnessing someone because they're so thick-headed. What I tell people when I teach CE is, look, I'm teaching this to you because I think that we don't know how to do this very well, but we all know the 2x4 approach. We know how to hit people in the head with the truth, but both are important, and Jesus demonstrated both in different periods of his ministry. And I think if Jesus did both, we should do both and be open to both. And so my perspective has changed. I'm a lot more open to being playing a greater role than I have played in the past, because I see our world is burning, and we've got to reach people in any way we can to help them wake them up from their delusion.
What I'm trying to address, we were kind of, I'm gonna have to leave pretty soon, but you get people interested in apologetics in the first place, and how can your movie be used for that goal? And I'm thinking of two particular. I mentioned earlier, you have young people and older people whose children have grown up, gone to college, come back with, as atheists sometimes or agnostics.
Right.
But you have young people who feel the need between graduation, maybe even as early as high school, but definitely through college graduation or whatever, up until marriage, who feel I got to solve some of these questions for myself. And I'm hearing these professors that are saying things that contradict what my pastor told me growing up.
Right.
And then there's this big space of demographics, from, I don't know, 22 to 42, let's say, where it's just like the concern has gone away. It's evaporated.
Right.
And on top of that, there is the fact that only 3% of the United States is atheist, and only an additional 5% is agnostic. So selling apologetics if you live near a university campus, probably that skews, really, skews in an upward direction. But it's for the average American, they're not going to run into atheists and agnostics as frequently as maybe somebody in an academia would. What is the task of apologetics after
it isn't only for atheists, it is for all sorts of things. The resurrection, for example. What's the apologetic for the resurrection? Is the church using it? What's the apologetics for the inerrancy of Scripture? Is the church using it?
Right. Well, let me answer your question.
Yeah.
We want to use the movie to attract people to look at a life of someone who God used to influence many Christians. But in doing so, we're also providing a workbook that churches can use with the movie to be able to start asking these questions, helping Christians to think through their beliefs. And then we also have additional programs that we've developed. We have this material called Grounded that our youth apologetic specialist developed, Brian Henson. And, we use that curriculum. This is basically our answer to how to keep youth from leaving the church after college.
So you have more than a movie. You have curriculum.
We have much more than a movie.
That's music to the Sunday school, the director of education's ears. You have curriculum.
Exactly.
Right.
That's what we want to share with people when they go see the movie. We'll have all these different resources, and then their churches can take, or they can get online and
so people listen up.
Yes,
listen up.
These guys are coming out with curriculum, not just a movie.
Yeah.
Right. And we're gonna put their website on the description again in case it's not there. It'll be on there. Their contact information, info@ngim.org. So you can contact them. And Don and David, I appreciate you being on here. We're going to have you back again in the future. I have no doubt.
We want you back.
We want you back, and we'll watch your back too.
Yes. And please
Ron,
pray for us.
Walk us out of here.
We'll pray for you. We will definitely pray for you. Thank you for being here. But let's give credit to where credit is due, to whom credit is due. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Our culinary services are provided by Chef Ham and Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Justin Gase. Our Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and D Opposer. Our Mormon archives manager is Polly Gummas. Our liberal denominations bureau chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, Ode to Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Joe Pulling. Technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham & Howe. Our grievance resolution director is Giovanna Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is wiretapping, and original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for this content, although you will never be able to prove that in a court of law.
Never.
Never going to happen.
All right, David and Don, someone said make sure we invite you back, and we have already done that, and we will do that again in the future. Everyone else, say goodbye.
Hasta la vista, baby.
Great to be with you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for having it. And final word for me, I'm not a doctor yet.
Okay.
But you
I'm
play
glad
one
you
on this
clarified
webcast.
that up.
Working on it. Very, very
Next year, ask me again.
Okay.